Welcome to our T4 Kart build video number 1. In this video, we will show you how to install the rear axle along with related components such as the sprocket carrier, sprocket and chain, the brake disc and rear hubs. Using a 4mm Allen key, unscrew the grub screws so they do not restrict installing the axle within the support bearings. There are 3 grub screws on each bearing, located on the left and right of the cart. Run your fingers inside the bearing to ensure all grub screws are removed accordingly. When installing the axle, make sure that the Tillotson logo is located on the left, which is the brake system side. This ensures the keyway points on the axle line up for brake disc, sprocket carrier and rear hubs. Now we will install the axle by pushing it through the outside of the right bearing carrier. Once the axle is pushed through 1/3 of the way, we need to stop in order to fit the sprocket carrier. Make sure the sprocket carrier is fitted as shown, with the completely flat side facing inside towards the right bearing carrier. Push the axle through halfway and slide the sprocket carrier in further. Now fit the sprocket over the axle. Next we will fit the chain. You need to make sure the sprocket is cut as shown, so it can be removed after the axle is fully installed. It is recommended that the cut goes through the centre of one of the smaller bolt holes, along with finishing in the centre of 2 outside teeth. This provides extra support when the sprocket is mounted to the carrier. The brake disc and carrier, which comes assembled, is fitted next. Slide the axle through to the point where it meets the brake disc carrier. Separate both brake pads in order to make room for the brake disc to fit in between them. When installing the brake disc, make sure the rotation is correct as shown. It is important as the grooves are designed to extract heat from the brake disc. Place the brake disc between the 2 brake pads and begin to feed the axle through. Twisting the axle along with rotating the brake disc opposite directions will help the process of feeding the axle through the brake disc carrier. Push the axle all the way through the brake disc carrier and through the second bearing. Now we will fit the axle keyways for both the sprocket carrier and brake disc carrier. The keyways supplied are all the same size, so any 2 can be used. First, we will install the brake disc carrier keyway. Slide the axle back out to find the keyway location point. Press the keyway into the axle. Rotate the brake disc carrier until the keyway slot lines up with the keyway and then feed the axle through. It is important to do this step first, as we will not be able to access this keyway once axle is fully installed. Next, we will install the sprocket carrier keyway. Find the location points as shown and press the keyway into the axle. Once again, rotate the carrier until the keyway slot lines up and slide the carrier over the keyway. Now it's time to centre the axle on the cart. We measure from the bearing carrier to the end of the axle. We repeat this on each side to find the central position. Move the axle accordingly until you achieve a measurement of 198mm from the bearing carrier to the end of the axle as shown. At this point, we are ready to fix the axle into position. This is done by locking the grub screws on both the left and right axle bearings. Using a 4mm Allen key, individually remove the grub screws and put a small amount of blue Loctite onto the thread. Install the grub screws back into their locations and lock onto the axle. Repeat this process for each of the 3 grub screws on both the left and right bearing. When complete, it's important to recheck all the grub screws individually and provide even force when locking each one into position. It is also advised to run some insulation tape over the grub screws on both bearings as shown. This will stop them from falling out if they ever come loose, which can happen. Finally, we can now fit the rear hubs. Find the keyway location points on either side of the axle and push the keyway into position. On the right side of the axle, we do not use the inner keyway position. This is only for engines with alternative drive locations. Take the rear hubs and slide them over the end of the axle while lining up the keyway slot. Repeat this step for both sides. Next, we measure 230 millimeters from the bearing carrier to the outside of the hub where the rims will be attached. This measurement can be adjusted, which will be further explained in our kart setup videos. Finally, using a 6mm Allen key, we tighten the bolt on the hubs to lock them into the axle.